Hey everybody, what's up? My name is Crypt13 and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about Ganyu and why I think she is currently the best 5-star in the game. Let's not dilly-daddle and let's just jump right into it. So there is basically one big reason why I think she is currently the best 5-star in the game compared to some of the other highly rated 5-stars. And that reason is because she is not reliant on her entire kit in order to deal damage. A lot of the highly rated current 5-stars that we have right now are very reliant on their entire kit in order to deal a respectable amount of damage. Before we get started, I should say that I think she's the best 5-star for free-to-play and low-spending players. If you're a whale, then my opinion probably means nothing because you have so many resources to invest into your characters that it doesn't really matter who you level up because they're all going to be good for you. I should also say that I still think that Venti is probably and completely unmatched currently in the game as well. He's just really good. But comparing Venti to Ganyu is like comparing apples to oranges because they don't really fill the same role. I want to compare Ganyu to other characters that are typically played in the main DPS role, so characters like Klee and Diluc. So let me try to illustrate my point by taking a look at Klee first. Most of Klee's big damage comes from being able to use her charged attack. Even better when you have the explosive spark buff applied, because the explosive spark gives you an extra 50% increased damage to her charge attacks and it makes it cost no stamina. So what this means is that her playstyle is very much revolved around maintaining uptime on that spark as much as possible. In order to do so, you need to deal damage with her E skill or her normal attacks. Her normal attacks can be quite slow if you're not adept at animation canceling, so that leaves her E skill being the most reliable way to generate an explosive spark. And this is probably the best way to generate that spark because it can deal damage up to 3 times with each bounce, and then the enemies can run into the mines to also possibly generate another spark. So I think from this, it becomes pretty clear that Klee is at least reliant on her E skill in order to deal a good amount of damage. Now when it comes to Diluc, I think this one is very apparent in that he is very much reliant on his kit. He literally needs his E skill to dish out most of his damage. It's pretty much the whole character. His E skill is also his main source of energy generation, and it generates a lot in order to build up his burst, which is only a 40 energy cost burst, which is actually very low and very good. And when he does so, he infuses his sword with pyro, which definitely is a huge factor in his damage output, especially considering he really likes using the Crimson Witch set. So with all that said, I think it is pretty clear that Diluc relies pretty much on his entire kit in order to deal his damage. If he's just doing normal attacks, he really is missing out on a ton of damage. So what about when it comes to Ganyu? Well, she doesn't rely on her kit at all because most of her damage comes from her charge shot. She doesn't depend on her E skill or her ult in order to deal most of that damage. It definitely is a good factor and good source of more damage, but again, it's really not the main source. Her elemental burst does give her an extra 20% cryo damage bonus, and the taunting mace so that you don't have to dodge as much, which are definitely very important things to point out. But from a damage perspective, most of Ganyu's damage is again just coming from her charge shot, which compared to Klee, the scaling on her charge shot is a lot more and doesn't require stamina, and then compared to Diluc, doesn't require an elemental skill in order to deal elemental damage. So Ganyu doesn't really rely on her kit. Why does that make her good? So what? Since she doesn't rely on her kit, that means that her investment cost is significantly lower than both Klee and Diluc. You really only need to level up one talent to get the most damage out of Ganyu. If you want more damage, then you can move on to the elemental burst and then the elemental skill. But characters like Diluc and Klee will pretty much require you to level up more than one part of their kit, literally doubling or even tripling the talent investment cost. If you watched my video comparing all of Ganyu's weapon choices as well, then you also know that a free 4-star weapon is a pretty decent choice for her as well. So in my opinion, this is one of the main reasons why she is definitely the undisputed best 5-star character as of update 1.2 to pull for if you're free to play or low spending. That's not all of the reasons why I think she's really good. There are 2 more reasons that I want to go over. First is future content and second is damage. So first is future content. content. Characters that heavily rely on their kit are going to have a harder time dealing damage than Ganyu based on some of the patterns we've been seeing with some of the content that we're getting so far. The Hypostatic Symphony event has a lot of different debuffs that directly affect a character's kit, more specifically increasing the cooldown on their elemental skills and decreasing their energy regeneration for their burst. So that means that characters that are overly reliant on their kit are just inherently weaker in these types of challenges. A character like Child, who heavily relies on his E skill to deal damage, isn't a great choice unless you've invested a great deal into him, enough to bypass the elemental skill cooldown. So basically that means that if you can one cycle the boss, then it doesn't matter to you. But if you're unable to do that, then all of the resources that you poured into Child pretty much go to waste because he's going to be having a hard time clearing these new challenges. So of course, I'm not saying that it is impossible to do it with Child. I'm just saying that comparatively to Ganyu, the amount of investment required to clear that content is going to be much lower with Ganyu. This is just one example to illustrate that point. There are some future characters that are coming like Zhao, who will rely very heavily on their burst to really initiate their damage. So that means you have to be able to one cycle these bosses in order to use these types of characters in these challenges. So again, a lot of investment. Of course, Zhao is not actually released yet, but I think that it is very clear that he relies heavily on his burst to deal most of his damage, according to data mine and leaks. And then the last thing is damage. The best way to illustrate this is to compare Diluc's damage to Ganyu's damage. And in order to do so, I needed to look up their frame data so that we could get a good DPS comparison between these two characters. If you watched my Ganyu overview video, we already know Ganyu's frame data, but I'll quickly go over it here again. Ganyu clocks in at about 126 frames in order to complete the entire animation for raising, shooting, and lowering the bow, and then raising it up again to shoot another one. So that means this is about a 2-second commitment to shoot a charge shot. For Diluc, I measured his frame data for his typical combo. So this means you are doing his E skill, 1 auto combo, 2 auto combo, another E skill, 1 auto combo, 2 auto combo, and then the last E skill. This combo clocks in at about 413 frames, which is just a little bit under 7 seconds. This means that Ganyu, who can perfectly hit all her charge shots and doesn't mess up lowering and raising her bow, can get about 3 shots in about the same amount of time it takes Diluc to complete his combo. With all that considered, here is the data when we compare them side by side, and I think it's pretty clear who wins here. There are a couple of notes that I should make here. Firstly, the total damage number here for Diluc is his entire combo that I mentioned earlier, including his elemental burst damage. With that said, Diluc has the possibility to hit enemies with the slash damage of his burst and the explosion damage of his burst, but that is not counted here. Most typical situations mostly will just see the slash damage. For Ganyu, her elemental burst damage isn't even factored in, so even though we don't consider the extra explosion damage from Diluc, it should be crystal clear who the winner still is. These calcs are also using a prototype Archaic and a prototype Crescent, and don't consider the prototype Crescent's buff or the Archaic's extra 240 attack damage every 15 seconds. Also, Ganyu has a much larger AoE on her moves, whereas Diluc will mostly be hitting single targets, although he does have the ability to hit multiple enemies at once if they are positioned correctly. However, Ganyu does have an AoE that is much more consistent and much larger. Ganyu, however, does have a larger margin of error, which will significantly lower your DPS if you are interrupted or if you miss your charge shots. With all of those notes considered, I still think that Ganyu is the winner in terms of damage. I really do think that Ganyu is going to be one of the best main DPS carries in the game for a very long time. She might be the best unit to roll for if you're a free-to-play player, but of course, don't let this convince you from playing the game how you want. These again are mostly just opinions and future thoughts. This game is ultimately a PvE game, so it doesn't matter how strong a unit is, you can still clear pretty much everything with whoever you want. The Hypostasis event debuffs weren't even required at all, so it's pretty much clearable with any team. If you're saving for Zhao or Hu Tao, then I hope you still do so because we play games to have fun. Don't let this video change your mind about who to pull for. Alright, that pretty much wraps up this video. If you guys made it this far and you liked what you saw, then please don't forget to hit that like button and even consider subscribing to the channel. I'm still very small time and literally every like and subscribe helps me out and puts a smile on my face. Alright guys, I will see you later.